The cold wind swept across the muddy runways of Halesworth, Suffolk. England was slowly waking beneath a steel-gray sky, heavy with rain and war. The hangars trembled under the low growl of Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines, mechanical beasts that shook the ground before even leaving it. The mechanics, their eyes red from fatigue and oil smoke, made one last inspection of the silver fuselages of the P-47 Thunderbolts, those squat giants built to withstand the fury of the sky. In the morning mist, Captain John Jack Morrison adjusted his leather gloves. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a quiet tension he had learned to tame over countless missions. Behind him, the men of his 61st Fighter Squadron prepared in an almost religious silence. Everyone knew what the dawn's order meant. Strike at the heart of the Reich. Escort the B-17s heading to bomb Hanover. A long, perilous mission, over a land where every cloud could hide death. Colonel Hub Zemke, their commander, walked along the line of planes. His eyes, stern yet filled with respect, swept across the young faces of his pilots. He knew he might lose one or two of them today. The law of the sky never forgave. But he also knew they were ready, trained to fight, fly low, hit hard, and come back alive, whatever it took. Jack climbed into the cockpit of Lady Ruth, his P-47 painted with a blazing red nose. The familiar scent of warm metal and fuel filled his lungs. He brushed his fingers over the photograph tucked between the dials, a smiling brunette woman, Ruth, his wife. He hadn't seen her in 10 months. War had turned every memory into a talisman. The radio crackled. Zemke to all units, check formation, and prepare for takeoff. One by one, the Thunderbolts came to life with a synchronized roar. Their propellers sliced through the damp air. Then, in a thunderous rumble, the fighters raced down the runway, leaving behind a trail of mud and flame. Over the North Sea, the formation climbed higher. The P-47s were already escorting the first wave of B-17 flying fortresses, massive and majestic under the pale morning light. At 25,000 feet, the cold bit through their suits and every breath came hard. Morrison clenched his jaw, eyes fixed on the horizon. Germany lay ahead. Enemy territory he now knew as well as a hunter knows his forest. But deep inside, he still felt fear, that silent companion that never really left him. He remembered the first time he had seen a plane disintegrate under enemy fire. The pilot's scream still echoed in his mind. That day, he had understood that war, no matter how brave the men fighting it, was never glorious. It was only noise, fire, and ashes. Voices burst in his headset. "Bandits at 2 o'clock! Multiple contacts, high!" Morrison looked up. A squadron of FW-190s sliced through the clouds. The enemy had arrived. Hearts pounded. Fingers tightened on the triggers. The B-17s kept their steady course while the P-47s broke formation to intercept. Morrison felt the surge of adrenaline flood his body. The sky became an invisible battlefield. The first shot came suddenly. A burst of 20mm shells tore past his right wing. He rolled sharply, diving toward the sun to blind his pursuer. Behind him, Lieutenant O'Donnell shouted over the radio, "He's on me! I can't shake him off!" Morrison glanced over. A Focke-Wulf was glued to O'Donnell's tail. Without hesitation, Morrison dove, lined up his sights, and fired. The .50 caliber machine gun spat fire and lead. The FW-190 exploded into a black cloud. But there was no triumph. Morrison felt nothing but emptiness. 1 second of silence. Then another alarm. More enemies inbound. The battle had only just begun. For nearly an hour, the skies above Hanover turned into hell. Contrails twisted together. Planes looped and dove, vanishing into clouds. Screams filled the radios, mingling with explosions. One by one, the B-17s released their deadly payloads, drowning the German city in smoke and flame. When calm finally returned, Morrison counted his men. 2 planes missing. 2 names erased from the board. He stayed silent, staring into the gray sea on the flight home. Around him, the sky was peaceful again, indifferent. That night, back at the base, the survivors drank in silence. The whiskey tasted of blood and metal. Morrison raised his glass without a word. The thunder of engines still echoed in his head. He knew that tomorrow it would all begin again. Night had swallowed Halesworth. Rain beat against the barracks windows as the few survivors from the Hanover mission tried to find sleep. The smell of fuel, leather, and tobacco still clung to their uniforms. Some slept fully dressed, helmets beside their beds, as if a new order could come at any moment. Others lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, haunted by the faces that hadn't returned. Captain Jack Morrison couldn't sleep either. Sitting at his desk, he stared at the photograph of Ruth. Her smile seemed to belong to another world, a world without roaring engines, without flames in the sky, without comrades lost to smoke. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat still, listening to the rain drumming on the roof like the heartbeat of a distant memory. At dawn, a familiar rumble rose from the distance. The mechanics were lighting up the hangars again. Trucks unloaded ammunition and pilots prepared for another day. The smell of hot oil and metal mingled with that of burnt coffee. Nothing stopped the war machine, not fatigue, not fear, not death. A sergeant entered, holding a folder. "Orders from HQ, Captain. New mission, rail installations in Hanover. Same sector as yesterday." Morrison slowly lifted his gaze. The same sector, the same hell. He clenched his jaw. "Very well. Tell Colonel Zemke the 61st will be ready." A few hours later, the entire base was trembling again. Thunderbolts lined up on the runway, dark silhouettes beneath the pale morning light. The ground crews moved mechanically, adjusting weapons, topping off fuel, ignoring the knot of fear in their stomachs. Every takeoff could be the last. Morrison climbed into his P-47. The cockpit, cold as a tomb, closed around him. His fingers slid over the familiar levers, and the photo still taped beside the compass. He took a deep breath. "Lady Ruth, don't let go of me now." Engines roared to life, shaking the ground. One by one, the planes shot down the runway and tore through the fog. The pale sky lit up under their trails. Over the English Channel, Morrison felt the wind strike the fuselage. Beside him, O'Donnell, Mackay, and Wilson formed the main patrol. They flew tight, alert, eyes scanning every cloud. The B-17s they escorted, massive, slow-moving giants, carved a silver line toward Germany. As they neared Hanover, the clouds turned red. The rising sun hit the smoke still rising from the ruins of yesterday's bombardment. A shiver ran down Morrison's spine. Below them, thousands of men, women, civilians lived or died under the bombs. He had long since believed that war spared the innocent. A shout crackled through the radio. "Visual contact! 6 FW-190s at 11 o'clock. Defensive formation," Morrison barked. The sky erupted again. Streaks of white and bursts of fire. Planes dived, twisted, and crossed paths in a deadly dance. Tracer rounds lit up the clouds like lightning. Morrison dived on an enemy, locked him in his sights, and fired. The German fighter exploded in a flash of orange, its wing torn apart. But there was no time to celebrate. "Jack, they're coming from behind!" O'Donnell shouted. A burst tore through the cockpit. Morrison felt the impact, saw blood on his sleeve. A bullet had pierced the canopy, slicing through his arm. He grit his teeth and held the stick steady. No way he was going down. Not today. The battle raged for nearly 40 minutes. 40 minutes of suspended hell above the world. Explosions mixed with screams, fire with prayer. Then slowly the FW-190s pulled back, leaving behind a sky shredded with smoke. The B-17s dropped their loads, and the city below ignited once more. Hanover burned. Morrison watched as fire clouds rose from the earth, black columns climbing toward the sun. It was both beautiful and terrible.
the cold beauty of destruction. On the way back, no one spoke. Engines droned, the wind hissed against the metal, and the silence between men grew heavier than lead. When they landed, the base greeted them with a mix of relief and dread. Colonel Zemke was waiting on the tarmac, his eyes scanning the bullet-riddled planes and the hollow faces of his men. He asked in a low voice, "How many?" "2 lost, 1 wounded," Morrison replied. The colonel nodded silently, then placed a hand on his captain's shoulder. "You did your duty, Jack. Get some rest. We're taking off again tomorrow." That night Morrison didn't drink. He sat outside instead, staring at the overcast sky, his arm bandaged, his heart heavy. The war went on, relentless, and he knew that, little by little, it was erasing something inside him, something human. In the distance, the engines went quiet one by one. Silence settled over the base. But in his ears, the rumble remained. The thunder of the sky, the roar of the Thunderbolts, the endless symphony of war.
Dawn was barely breaking when the P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group roared down the runway at Halesworth, their engines growling like lions in the morning mist. The heavy fighters cut through the air with military precision, forming a protective wall around the B-17s and B-24s loaded with bombs. The sky above the channel was gray, thick with low, menacing clouds, every shaft of light hiding potential danger. In his cockpit, Captain Jack Morrison felt both excitement and tension, his heart pounding in rhythm with the thunder of the engines and the trembling instruments. As they approached the Ruhr, the density of air traffic, both friendly and hostile, increased dramatically. Radio chatter filled the air, reports of enemy positions, warnings of incoming fighters, confirmations of the bomber's route. Morrison adjusted his controls, anticipating every turn and climb. The Thunderbolts, heavy but immensely powerful, responded with remarkable precision, each maneuver a perfect balance between instinct and training. Suddenly, a sharp alert burst through his headset. "Bandits at 3 o'clock, diving fast!" Morrison caught sight of a squadron of FW-190s breaking through a curtain of clouds. The attack came from the flank, sudden and dangerous. The Thunderbolts reacted instantly, diving in tight formation to shield the bombers. The sky turned into a chaotic battlefield of smoke trails, flames, and the deafening chatter of machine guns. Every pilot had to react without hesitation. Every second counted. Morrison dove behind an FW-190, lining it up in his sights. The .5 caliber machine gun spat a stream of fire. The German fighter shuddered under the impacts, then disintegrated in a flash of smoke and flame. But at the same moment, another enemy burst in from the right. Morrison's plane was hit, the cockpit shaking violently. A chill of fear shot through him, but he turned it into pure focus. Every movement mattered. Every breath could mean life or death. Behind him, his wingmen were deep in the fight. O'Donnell narrowly dodged a burst of gunfire, while Mackey retaliated, shooting down an FW-190 that tried to break through to the bombers. The sky became a living painting of destruction and tactical precision, explosions, smoke, and aircraft twisting and diving in deadly spirals. Morrison felt the tension building with each turn, each maneuver demanding total control and absolute precision from his Thunderbolt. Then, disaster struck. One of the bombers took a direct hit. Enemy fire tore through its wings, setting it ablaze. Morrison reacted instantly, diving to draw the attacker's way and create cover for the wounded bomber. Seconds stretched into minutes. Every choice carried the weight of life or death. He remembered his countless hours of training, all those simulated drills, but now realized that reality was far beyond any preparation. The chaos was absolute, and unpredictability ruled the sky. Moments later, a new wave of German fighters appeared from behind the clouds. Morrison, O'Donnell, and Mackey tightened formation, creating a defensive triangle around the bombers. The Thunderbolts, with their firepower and rugged frames, absorbed the hits and fought back fiercely. Each pilot felt the strain. Every vibration of the fuselage, every blast of air, every bullet striking nearby reminded them how close death was. Time and again, Morrison faced head-on duels. An FW-190 appeared from the left, diving at full speed. Morrison banked sharply, aimed, and fired. The enemy exploded into a ball of smoke and flame. No time to breathe. Another fighter was already approaching from the right. The Thunderbolts twisted and looped, executing desperate maneuvers to protect the bombers and eliminate threats. Every second was critical, every move calculated with deadly precision. Amid the chaos, Morrison's thoughts drifted to the men on the ground, to the civilians, to everything that depended on their mission. Each shot, each evasive move, each risk was not just about survival, but about responsibility. This war wasn't just a clash of machines. It was a test of courage, strategy, and endurance in a sky where danger could come from anywhere. When the last wave of enemy fighters finally broke off, the sky grew eerily calm. The bombers released their payloads over the Ruhr's rail installations, and the earth below erupted into chaos, flames, smoke, destruction. Exhausted but alive, Morrison watched the columns of smoke rise into the air. A cold, pragmatic sense of accomplishment filled him. The mission was complete, but at what cost? Most Thunderbolts had made it back, yet a few call signs were missing from formation. The return to Halesworth was silent. Engines hummed through the evening haze, the wind whispering against the bullet-riddled fuselages. Each pilot was lost in his thoughts. The war went on, relentless and unforgiving, but each mission brought the Allies one step closer to victory. Morrison looked at the sky glowing red and orange with sunset, fatigue pressing on his shoulders, knowing that tomorrow they would fight again. Courage, discipline, and resilience would once again be tested. When they finally landed, the base seemed to exhale with them. Ground crews rushed in, checking bullet holes, refueling, rearming for the next sortie. Morrison climbed down from the cockpit, his legs trembling, but his eyes fixed on the horizon. The sky over the Ruhr was still burning. He knew the fight would never truly end. And in that silence after the storm, he made himself a promise. To stay alive, to protect his men, and to keep flying, even through the inferno of the German sky. Dawn was barely breaking over the Halesworth Air Base, painting the sky in pale, icy shades. The Thunderbolts, still scarred from the previous day's missions, seemed heavier, as if the exhaustion of their pilots had seeped into the metal itself. But duty knew neither rest nor hesitation. Radio reports confirmed that German forces were preparing a massive counterattack over the Ruhr, aiming to intercept the remaining bombers and punish the escort squadrons. Captain Jack Morrison stood silently, watching the line of P-47s on the runway, his face set and serious. The atmosphere was tense. Every pilot knew this mission could cost lives. O'Donnell, Mackey, and Wilson adjusted their gear in solemn silence. Mechanics performed final checks with meticulous precision, while the engines already roared, ready to tear through the morning mist. "Captain, everything's ready. Even the new pilots are in formation," reported Sergeant Miller, breathless from running. Morrison nodded. "All right then, tight formation. Priority is to protect the bombers." Over the English Channel, the P-47s climbed swiftly, forming a protective wall around the B-17s. The cold wind bit through their flight suits, and every pilot felt the chill deep in their bones. In the distance, the Ruhr loomed, still smoldering from the previous day's raids. But beneath that deceptive calm, danger was waiting. Suddenly, a dark mass emerged from the clouds. An entire squadron of FW-190s and Me-109s approaching at high speed. Their strategy was clear: strike the bombers, wipe out the escorts, and vanish before an organized response could form. Morrison gripped the controls, every muscle tightening with adrenaline. The battle erupted instantly. The Thunderbolts dove and rolled with brutal power, absorbing enemy fire and striking back with deadly precision. Morrison found himself locked in a head-to-head duel with an FW-190, a deadly dance where every move mattered. The P-47's machine guns blazed, tracer rounds lighting up the gray sky, tearing into the enemy plane until it exploded in a fireball of smoke and flame. But before he could recover, a warning blared through his headset.
A B-17 was under attack by multiple fighters. Morrison reacted instantly, diving back into the chaos to cover it. Behind him, O'Donnell and Mackey were fully engaged, turning the sky into a deadly ballet of steel and fire. The Thunderbolts took hits, some planes damaged, others barely dodging fatal bursts. Every second stretched into eternity. The pilots adjusted altitude and speed with razor-sharp instinct, anticipating enemy maneuvers and shielding the bombers with a mix of discipline and raw survival instinct. Morrison felt a burning pain in his shoulder. A bullet had pierced the cockpit. He clenched his jaw, ignoring the wound. There was no time for pain. In a tight turn, he spotted Wilson in trouble, his P-47 trailing smoke, hit by enemy fire. Without hesitation, Morrison banked sharply, diving in to cover him, drawing the attacker's attention. The seconds were critical, but teamwork and coordination outweighed fear. The battle raged for nearly an hour. The Thunderbolts, heavy but powerful, took damage and struck back, every shot calculated, every move purposeful. Explosions lit the sky. Clouds of smoke mixed with contrails, creating an apocalyptic panorama of aerial warfare. Morrison watched as enemy fighters disintegrated under the P-47's relentless fire. But the cost was high. Too many planes lost or crippled. As the formation turned homeward, a final wave of enemy fighters appeared from behind. Morrison's heart raced. He took the lead, guiding his men through a last flurry of tight maneuvers, shielding the bombers and taking out the remaining threats. Adrenaline, fatigue, and fear blended into a dizzying haze, yet every move stayed sharp, every burst of fire precise. Finally, the chaos faded. The bombers had dropped their payloads, and the Thunderbolts headed back towards Halesworth, their fuselages riddled with bullet holes, their pilots exhausted but alive. Morrison, his face blackened with soot and sweat, gazed towards the burning roar, a symbol of both success and sacrifice. 2 planes down, Morrison, but the others made it back. You held formation and protected the bombers. That's all that matters. Morrison nodded silently, his trembling hands betraying the exhaustion beneath his steady gaze. He knew that tomorrow would bring another sortie. The war never stopped, and that every victory came at a terrible cost. That night, Jack sat alone beside his P-47. The pain in his shoulder reminded him of his mortality, but so did the sight of his comrades' planes resting in the hangars. Despite the chaos, the loss, and the fear, he knew he would fly again. The Thunderbolts would roar once more, he would protect his men, and continue to dominate the German skies, no matter the cost. The sky over the roar would remain a battlefield, but with courage, discipline, and sheer will, Morrison would survive, and so would his squadron.
Dawn was just breaking over Halesworth. The English sky was painted in shades of gray and rose, but for the pilots of the 56th Fighter Group, the beauty of the morning no longer mattered. Today, the Luftwaffe was preparing what seemed to be a massive counterattack, a desperate yet organized response to all the Allied missions carried out so far. Radio reports spoke of enemy formations larger than ever, of swift fighter squadrons and seasoned pilots, some veterans of the Battle of Britain itself. Captain Jack Morrison stared out from his cockpit, his expression grim. Every pilot felt the same palpable tension. O'Donnell, Mackey, and Wilson were getting ready, caught between excitement and fear. Mechanics rushed between aircraft, checking weapons, engines, and instruments. Every detail mattered. Every second could decide life or death. "Get ready, boys. Tight formation. We won't let a single one through." Morrison drew a deep breath, feeling the stiffness in his muscles. Today they weren't just fighting for a mission or a strategic target, they were fighting to stay alive. Takeoff was a roar of engines and dust. The Thunderbolts cut through the air with power, forming a wall of metal and fire above the B-17 bombers. Over the channel, the cold bit into their skin, the wind howled, and every pilot felt the weight of the moment. Soon, the Ruhr Valley came into view, smoky, menacing, the stage for their greatest battle. Suddenly, a dark mass emerged from the clouds.
Dozens of FW-190s and ME-109s dived in tight formation, rushing toward the Allied bombers. Morrison felt the surge of adrenaline. The instantly turned into chaos, clouds and smoke, tracer lines and explosions. Every pilot had to react without hesitation. Every heartbeat counted. The Thunderbolts plunged into the fray. Morrison quickly found himself locked in a close dogfight with an FW-190. His guns spat fire, tracer rounds slicing through the gray sky. The enemy plane burst into flames. But behind him, more opponents closed in, relentless and many. Seconds stretched into eternities. Morrison saw O'Donnell locked in a desperate fight. An ME-109 tried to break through toward the bombers. Without thinking, Morrison rolled to intercept, firing point blank and destroying the threat. Mackey, slightly hit, fought back with precision, while Wilson guided the B-17s through deadly airspace. The sky had become a moving battlefield, a labyrinth of metal, fire, and courage. Then came a critical moment. Morrison spotted an FW-190 heading straight for the lead bomber, the one carrying the main payload. He dove at full speed, lined up his sights, and fired. The German fighter exploded just before reaching its target. Relief was brief, but another enemy formation appeared from behind. The battle reached its peak. The Thunderbolts took heavy fire. Some planes were hit, flames licking their fuselages. Coordination and precision were vital. Every maneuver meant protecting the bombers while striking back. Morrison felt the exhaustion, fear, pain, and focus merge into one unbroken rhythm of survival. He scanned the sky, predicting enemy moves, anticipating each dive, each turn, each threat. Then came horror. Wilson was hit. His P-47 was ablaze. Morrison saw him struggle to keep control, guiding him over the radio, trying to get him home. Mackey was also struck, his wing riddled with holes. Morrison felt the crushing weight of command. Every life depended on him, on his judgment, on his awareness. Despite the losses, the Thunderbolts held the line. Morrison engaged one last FW-190, diving hard and firing point blank. The aircraft exploded in smoke and flame. Gradually, the sky fell silent, a shattered, scarred battlefield. The B-17s had dropped their bombs. The Ruhr burned again, columns of smoke and fire rising into the sky. Morrison, breathless and covered in soot, watched in silence. Two of his squadron's planes were gone, others heavily damaged. The men were exhausted, but alive. Every victory had its price. Every decision had mattered. The flight back to Halesworth was weighed down with silence. Engines droned through the mist, and each pilot replayed the mission in his mind. Morrison, his arm bandaged and his face marked by fatigue, glanced back toward the still-burning Ruhr. He knew tomorrow would bring another mission. The war wasn't over, but their courage and determination had left an indelible mark on the German sky. On the tarmac, Colonel Zemke met the survivors with quiet respect. "You held formation, protected the bombers, and brought your men home. That's all that matters." Morrison nodded, drained but proud, knowing this battle would stay with them forever. That night, sitting alone beside his P-47, Jack stared up at the black sky. The ache in his shoulder, the faces of the fallen, the flames of the Ruhr, they all swirled in his mind. Yet despite the losses, the chaos, and the pain, he knew he would fly again, protect his brothers in arms, and keep fighting. The Thunderbolts would roar again tomorrow, and so would he. The German sky, witness to courage, sacrifice, and survival, would remain their silent judge.
The English sky that morning was of an almost unreal clarity. After several days of intense missions over the Ruhr, the Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group were finally heading back to Halesworth. The aircraft rumbled softly, like tired beasts catching their breath. Low clouds drifted apart, letting shafts of sunlight glint off the silver fuselages of the P-47s, each scar and bullet hole telling a story of courage, fear, and survival. Captain Jack Morrison felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. His squadron had made it back, but the names of the missing still echoed in his mind. O'Donnell, Mackey, and Wilson, exhausted yet alive, exchanged silent glances. No words were needed. They all knew what they had endured, what they had lost, and what they had achieved.
As the base came into view, the ground crews and officers were ready. Men ran across the tarmac, guiding the Thunderbolts toward their hangars, checking damaged wings, making sure every pilot could set foot on the ground safely. One by one, the engines shut down, leaving behind an almost sacred silence. The roar and smoke of battle gave way to a calm that stood in stark contrast to the chaos they had just survived. On the tarmac, Colonel Zemke stood waiting, watching his men with pride and gravity. His eyes settled on Morrison as he climbed out of his cockpit, his face blackened with soot, his body still trembling from tension. "Jack, you and your men did an exceptional job," Zemke said, his deep voice carrying across the field. "The Ruhr has been hit, the bombers completed their mission, and your men came home. You can be proud." Morrison nodded, words failing him. Fatigue, adrenaline, and emotion blended into something indescribable. He remembered every turn, every burst of gunfire, every instant when death hovered just meters away. Yet they had made it, alive, victorious against impossible odds. The medal ceremony came soon after. The surviving pilots were honored for their bravery. Morrison received the Distinguished Flying Cross, its cold metal gleaming like both a symbol of honor and a reminder of the price paid for every victory. O'Donnell, Mackey, and Wilson also were decorated, each feeling that same mix of pride, relief, and melancholy. That evening, Morrison walked alone near the airstrip. The English wind brushed his face, but he felt neither warmth nor comfort. Memories of battle filled his mind. The explosions in the sky, the shapes of enemy planes, the flames over the Ruhr. He thought of fallen comrades, of their families, and of those who would never see this clear sky again. And yet, amid the melancholy, he felt a quiet peace. The war raged on, yes, but for this day, for this campaign, they had triumphed. They had survived, completed their mission, and written their place in history. The Thunderbolts still roared faintly in the distance, not in battle, but in the calm of victory, witnesses to the courage and sacrifice of these men. Morrison returned to his plane, placing a hand on its battle-marked fuselage. He thought of Ruth's photo, her smile now feeling closer, more real. He took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders for the first time in weeks. The war wasn't over, but on this night, victory tasted both bitter and comforting. Night fell over Halesworth. The Thunderbolts slept in their hangars, and the men finally rested. But in the air, in the silence, in memory, lingered the echoes of battle. The roar of engines, the crack of gunfire, the flames and smoke of the Ruhr. Every pilot knew the war would continue tomorrow. But tonight, they had survived. They had owned the skies, and history would remember them. Jack Morrison looked up at the stars. Each light reminded him of his comrades, his victories, and his losses. He promised himself he would fly again, protect those who needed him, and never forget. The English sky, now calm and peaceful, became a sanctuary after the inferno. And in that quiet, he knew he belonged among the silent heroes of this war, those who had faced death, challenged the German sky, and, against all odds, returned home.